Now they tell me Lee was a hard worker. They said he had him a small farm and a young wife one time, and they just had a newborn baby, and I reckon that young'un was gripped by the colic something awful. Said it cried all hours of the night. They couldn't get a minute's sleep for it. Somebody told Lee that stole milk could cure a colicky baby, so he was desperate to help it, and that's when he got his mind set on Edith's cow. Now Edith was a lone woman, and she lived by herself way up on the ridge above Lee. Pretty good piece from other folks. But I don't reckon she was just any woman. They said she had a way of knowing things before they happened, and said she could whip up just about any kind of remedy. Said she could fix just about any kind of sickness there was. I reckon that's why folks called her a witch. They said she didn't mind it none, that she had her peace and that's all she wanted. Now one late night, Lee he snuck up to Edith's house. Thought he was being sneaky. Thought nobody could see him. But Edith, she was always a-watching from the darkness of her cabin, and she saw Lee sneaking up to her cow with his milk bucket. Now Edith was a patient woman, not quick to anger, so she waited, and she watched as Lee stole that milk, and then he disappeared back down the holler. She didn't say a word, she didn't do a thing. But around here, actions speak louder than words, and every action comes with a price. Now just after he stole that milk, odd things started happening to him. I reckon everything he touched on his farm just fell apart, and nothing he done would work out right, and they even claimed his well went dry. His baby didn't stop crying, and I reckon that milk was just as rotten as milk could be. Didn't help a thing. And Lee, he'd got plumb to the end of his rope, and he knowed there was only one person that could be causing all that. So he mustered up the courage and swallowed his pride, and he went up toward Edith's house. And I reckon he found her sitting outside on the porch, smoking a pipe. But Lee, he told her what he done, and he was apologizing to her, and he told her about the sick baby, and I reckon he begged her to forgive him. And Edith, I reckon, sat there and listened to him. And when he got done, I reckon she turned to him and she said, "You thought you could take what wasn't yourn. But Lee, these old hills have their own way of dealing out justice. Why couldn't you just ask me for help instead of stealing from me?" Then I reckon she done something that Lee sure wasn't expecting. Reckon she got up and went in her house, and she come out with a little old jar with something other in it, and she said, "Give this to your baby, Lee, and it'll cure that colic. But remember, everything you do or you get in life comes with a price." I reckon Lee went on to the house, and he was guilt-ridden, but he was hopeful. I reckon whatever she gived him stopped that baby's a-crying, and things went to kindly shaping back up around home. And I don't reckon Lee ever forgot that lesson that Edith taught him. I reckon she continued to live up there on the ridge, and they even claimed that sometimes you could hear her laughing. And they said all the people just figured she was just laughing at Lee, saying she was remembering the time he tried to fool an old mountain witch. And I reckon Lee, he got older and he would tell that story to his grandbabies. He'd tell them, "Oh, Edith, you know, she was a good woman, but you sure didn't want to get on her bad side. Because if you did, she'd sure make you sorry for it." I I reckon this old story's been shared around on front porches, out in the gardens, and round the fire. And I reckon it's been shared to these youngsters that think it was a good idea to get the sticky fingers. Kind of reminder to them that there's always somebody watching, no matter how slick you think you are. There's always somebody knows what's going on. And it's a warning to them that everything comes with a price. And that these hills, they do have their own way of dealing with it. And they will get justice. Somewhere deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, there was a legend told by the Cherokee of terror, a story of a witch known as Spearfinger. She was a horrifying figure, and they say her skin was as hard as stone, and it was impervious to the arrows that would merely shatter upon impact. They claim her right hand held her own heart, but her finger was a different matter. It was said to be a long, sharp spear, a tool of death and deceit that she would use to extract and consume the livers of helpless children. They claim Spearfinger was sly and a master of disguise. She could take on the form of anyone, morphing into a beloved family member to deceive her victims. And her preferred disguise was that of a frail old woman, a disguise that drew sympathy and it allowed her to close in on her prey. She would beckon young children, calling them her grandbabies, and pulling them into a false sense of security. She would gently stroke their hair until they fell asleep. And once they fell unconscious, her lethal spear would strike, swiftly and silently, skillfully removing the livers to satisfy her gruesome hunger. And her mouth was stained red from the blood of the livers that she had eaten. The Cherokee tribes in the regions lived in fear, and they was tormented by the terror of Spearfinger. Trust was a luxury they could no longer afford, as the shape-shifting witch could be anyone, anywhere. Cherokee medicine man, sensing the escalating terror, called for a council with the neighboring tribes, and a plan had to be formed, a way they could end Spearfinger's reign of terror. The tribes united, devised a plan to lure the witch into a trap. And they dug a vast pit, and they started a large brush fire. The smoke billowing high into the sky was an irresistible lure for Spearfinger. And she approached, her steps heavy like thunder, rocks cracking beneath her feet. She appeared in the disguise of a helpless old woman. One warrior hesitated, but the old medicine man wasn't fooled, and they unleashed a barrage of arrows, revealing her true form as she wielded her spear finger in anger. Despite the onslaught, Spearfinger lunged towards the warriors, her spear finger slashing through the air, and she didn't see the pit until it was too late. And with a shocking thud, she fell in. But even trapped, she was defiant, taunting the warriors with a sickening song about her liver-eating exploits. And just then, the skies darkened as a flock of birds descended. A titmouse, a small bird, flew to the hunting party and sang a song, telling them to go for the heart. The warriors aimed for Spearfinger's chest, but the arrows fell useless against her stone-hard skin. Frustrated, they caught the titmouse, and they cut off its tongue. Brandon hit a lyre for its misleading guidance. Finally, a chickadee flew down and landed on Spearfinger's right hand, the hand clutching her heart. The warriors took this as a sign and aimed their arrows right toward her hand. And with mighty effort, they struck true, severing the witch's heart. Old Spearfinger let out a final terrible shriek as she collapsed in the pit, her dreaded Spearfinger twitching once before becoming still. And the reign of terror was over. The curse of Spearfinger, the liver eater, was lifted. And as of the chickadee, they claim if it lands on your house, it means you're safe. But they remember the titmouse as a liar because of its short tongue. And they remember the time when they beat Spearfinger, the liver eater. Granny witches. Now these ain't your ordinary witches of fairy tales and hocus pocus. No, sir. These grannies were the backbone of a many a holler and a ridge, the keepers of old wisdom, and the healers of ill and sorrow. In the heart of the mountains, where the peaks reach for the heavens, and the hollers hold secrets older than time itself, there live women of mighty reputation, and even mightier know-how. These women, often called granny witches, were the stewards of ancient knowledge passed down through the generations, from mother to daughter, like a most precious heirloom. Now, a granny witch weren't no fanciful thing. She was as real as the dirt under your boots, and as necessary as a spring rain. When sickness took a hold of a body, it was to her door folks would knock. With hands as gentle as a summer breeze, she could brew teas and conjure up salves made from the roots and herbs found only in the wild mountains. She knew the secrets of the plants, the trees and the creatures that roam the woods, and she could read the signs of the earth like an open book. She could mix up a poultice to draw out a fever, soothe a nasty cough with wild honey and black cohosh, or ease body aches with a touch of willow bark. And it wasn't just the body she could heal, it was the spirit too. A granny witch had words soft as a lullaby to calm a troubled mind, or give hope when the night seemed too dark to bear. Childbirth was another matter where the granny witch's hands were a godsend. When a new life was pushing its way into the world, she was right there, midwifing the babe with a skill that put even the sharpest doctor to shame. She'd have been there through the whole family line, bringing life after life into the light of day, and whispering the first words a newborn would hear. Being a granny witch wasn't no easy task. It took a heart strong enough to see life come and go, to nurse the dying and greet a newborn. It took a spirit fierce as a mountain cat and as soft as a newborn's skin. She was respected, feared some, but loved most of all. She was a thread that sewed the community tight. Now these grannies, they clung to the old ways like a tree clings to the earth. They were the keepers of stories and songs, of dances and rituals that the new world had all but forgotten. They remembered the old country, the one their ancestors left behind, and they kept it alive in their words and deeds. They knew the value of a spoken promise and the weight of a kept secret. Folks would often turn to them when the law or the church couldn't give them what they needed, whether it was a remedy for crops of failing, a charm to find lost love, or a prayer to keep the home safe. The granny witch was there, a beacon of tradition in an ever-changing world. She was the bridge between the old and the new, a living testament to the strength of those mountain folk. She held her head high, knowing she carried on the work of those who come before. And she taught those coming after how to walk the line between the seen and the unseen, the known and the mysterious. She was a guardian of the community. Her wisdom sought in times of strife and celebration alike. When feuds threatened to tear folk apart, she'd be there to mediate, with words honed by years of experience. And when the hollers echoed with the sound of fiddles and the stomp of dancing feet, you can bet she was there too, her eyes twinkling with joy and her laughter mingling with the music. But don't you go thinking the granny witch was some kind of saint. She was as human as the rest of us, with a temper that could flare like a summer storm if you crossed her wrong. And yet, her love for her people, and for the mountains that crave them all, shone through every deed. Years rolled on like the endless ridges of those peaks, and the modern world encroached over the hollers. The young folks started leaving, looking for easier lives in the cities, and the old ways began to fade, like the mist rising off the creeks at dawn. The granny witch was more than just a healer or a midwife. She was a symbol of resilience, and a living connection to the past, and a reminder that no matter how fast the world moved, there was power in slow and steady rhythm of mountain life. As the years pass, and the modern age tries to soothe out the rough edges of those mountains, the legend of the granny witch endures. It's in the way the people care for one another, in the wild herbs still growing in the creek beds, and in the quiet wisdom that whispers through the leaves of them ancient forest. It's a testament to the strength of those who know that true healing comes from the earth, the community, and the heart. That's the essence of the granny witch, a force of nature, a keeper of the flame, and an eternal guide through the trials and tribulations of this winding mountain life. And that, my friends, is a tale worth telling, worth remembering, as long as the mountains stand and the rivers run.
In the shadows of these mountains, there are many legends of the devil making his rounds. And hidden deep in the hollers and through the valleys, he made his presence known. Up in the left fork of one of these hollers stood a cabin, and within the walls of this cabin lived a woman they called Lucy, and the holler in which it stood was called Lucy Holler. Lucy was said to be evil, wicked, and mean, and they claimed that she sold her soul to the devil in exchange to possess black magic. Lucy spent her days of mocking and teasing the young'uns about. The main road in which the folk had to travel went right through Lucy Holler, and at any time of the year in passing Lucy's cabin, there was always smoke from the chimney. And even in the summertime, they claimed you could see Lucy's breath. Real early one morning, as a group of young'uns made their way by Lucy's on the way to school, Lucy came out and met them. She began cursing and making evil promises for the racket that they was making passing her house. She used her black magic, and she sent one of the little girls across the road to turning somersaults and cartwheels, and then landed the small girl in the hog pen, and then let out one of them evil, wicked laughs. The other children quickly ran to help the small girl from the hog pen, and they all headed back in the other direction. When they told the child's mother and father what Lucy had done, father's blood ran cold, and he headed toward Lucy Holler. He made his way to the cabin, and he saw her sitting on the front porch and smoking on a pipe. He walked right up to the porch and began pointing and threatening Lucy, and damning her to hell. Lucy blew smoke at him, and she said, "Hell will be on your heels soon, John Anderson." And she let out one of them laughs, and then in a poof of smoke she was gone. Shivering in his skin from what he had just witnessed, John Anderson scurried toward home. And Lucy kept good on her promise, as a series of bad fortunes and mishaps plagued the Andersons. A disease wiped out all of his cattle, a blight smothered out his crops, his wife took ill and passed on, and one of his sons vanished. And then one day the remaining Andersons up and vanished without any kind of word. Some folks believed that it was at the hands of Lucy and the black magic in which she possessed, while some believed John Anderson packed up and left hoping to escape Lucy's wrath. There was never, ever any confirmation either way. As the years passed, Lucy grew older, and she teased and she cursed a lot less. She began to walk with a hunched over back, and she used a small, scrawny walking stick. But still in the midst of the summers, She wore layers and layers of clothes, and a dark bonnet over her head. One morning, a man coming through Lucy Holler passed by, and he discovered Lucy laying on the ground. And he hurried to see about her. She looked at him and she said, "Time has come to pay my debt." He hurried off and got help. And him and some other men towed Lucy inside her cabin, and she quickly demanded they build her a fire in the fireplace. Now, as most mountain folks are, they come to lend a hand. And as a group of women was sitting around Lucy's bed, a stray cat made its way into the cabin and threw in under Lucy's bed. And she turned to one of the women, got her by the hand, and she said, "The devil is under my bed." After hearing these words, everyone jumped up, ran out of the cabin, and left Lucy to die alone. Looking from a distance, they watched as Lucy's cabin was a-shaking in strange lights and noises in the better part of the night. They could only watch in horror as it would spin and flop. It sounded like cats a-fighting. The awfulest racket you'd ever heard. And then a little bit before daylight, it grew quiet. Several days later, some of the men decided they needed to go in and get Lucy's body and bury it. When they went in, there wasn't a sign of Lucy's corpse anywhere, and the house was dusty and full of cobwebs and musky as it hadn't been lived in for years. No trace of Lucy was ever found, and to this day, nobody has ever resided in Lucy Holler.
In the foothills of southeastern Kentucky, late 1890s, there was two sisters by the name of Ann and Nan, bound by not just blood, but by the hardships they faced in life. Ann's husband spent most of his days in logging camps, leaving her alone to tend to their baby, with the only company of her sister Nan, who would often come to lend her a hand when she was alone. And then once they was faced by a spell on Ann's baby from an old evil mountain witch.
Tell me, where's your mommy?
One midsummer day a storm brewed, and during the raining and the storming and amongst the wind a-blowing, there came a gentle tap on the door. The two sisters, they looked outside to find Ruby, the old crone who lived around the ridge, and she had them wild eyes, Folks said she's an old mountain witch, and that her heart was as black as coal. Although the fear ached them to their bones, they couldn't refuse her shelter, for to cross Ruby was a courting misfortunes. So they let her in. And as the rain ceased, that old woman requested an odd favor. She asked to be walked down to the fence and to have it let down so she could cross it without hindrance. It was a peculiar because the fence hadn't bothered her path on her arriving, but the sisters dared not deny her. But that night, as darkness came about, Ann's baby let out a scream that would chill you to your soul. But as the night wore on, the baby seemed to get comfortable, and she fell off to sleep. A week or so had passed, and another one of them midsummer thunderstorms was making its way across the hill. And just like before, Ruby came pecking on the door again. And just like last time, she asked for the sisters to walk her down to the fence and lay it down so she could cross it and go home. It was after this second visit that Nan started growing suspicious, because she had heard about Ruby putting hexes on people, putting spells on them, using dark witchcraft. Without saying much of anything to her sister, she slipped off toward Ruby's, and she snuck around and she looked in her window, and she seen a setting in her, the old witch, in the glow of the fire. She had a pillar and a baby blanket in her lap, stabbing it with a needle and a laughing like somebody possessed. Nan, she run back toward home, and I guess the fear filled her legs, and she shared what she had seen with her sister Ann. And as the baby's cries cooled down into the night and went peacefully to sleep, them sisters come up with a plan that they was going to confront that evil that had been put upon that baby. Several weeks went by, and there wasn't no rain, and there wasn't no sign of Ruby. And the reason for Ruby's rainy day visit still remained a mystery as to why it was only when it was raining she would come courting and use her evil ways. But the day come when it began to storm again, and just like the other times, here come Ruby, just like they predicted. But this time, sisters were stubborn. They wasn't going to let Ruby come inside the house. They sat with her on the front porch, acting civil, but they was filled with animosity toward Ruby. Then Ruby asked for a drink of water, just like she wanted to get up and go inside. But Nan jumped up, fetched a cup of water, and she brung it outside to Ruby. And as the storm started to simmer down, Ruby stood when it got to be her custom to ask the sisters to walk with her down and let the fence down. But their plan was ready to go, and they willingly followed her down to the fence. That's when Ann, with her baby cradled in her arms, she distracted Ruby in a big way of talking, while Nan slipped a pin through Ruby's shoe, pinning her to the ground. Ruby was caught by the sisters. Ruby found herself not being able to lift her foot up, and just like the old tales foretold,
a witch pinned to the ground was powerless, and that's when the sisters confronted her. They told her they knowed what she'd been a-doing and how she'd been a-doing it, and they smacked her around and roughed her up a little, just to show her that they meant every word they had said. Ruby went to pleading with them, begging them to quit and let her up and let her go. That's when they told her how things was going to be, and they decided they'd strike a deal with the old witch. And they told Ruby that if she agreed to never cross their path ever again, or cast any kind of evil on them or their kin, that they would let her go. Ruby promised. She swore. She said if they'd just let her go, that she would agree to never bother them again. So Nan pulled the pin from the shoe and they let her go. True to her word, the old woman never bothered them again. And the sisters, they stuck just as close as ever. And that just goes to show how somebody with fear towards somebody else can swallow that fear when it comes to protecting their family. Folks, I want to thank you for stopping by and listening to this story. My mama would tell us this story when we was kids or growing up. I thought I'd finally share it with you all. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, yous all stay safe and have a good one.
Growing up amidst the hollers and the hills of Appalachia, I've always been amazed by the old ways and the cures that folks here hold dear. The stories that have been passed down through the generations, they carry the wisdom of our ancestors. They fascinate me. And in particular, the tales of wart cures. There's something intriguing to me about the simplicity and the faith that surrounded these remedies, reminding me of the strength and the resourcefulness of our Appalachian heritage. In these parts, we were always warned as kids to stay away from frogs. It was said that those slippery little creatures could pass on warts, and we believed that with all our hearts. There had to be some truth to it, didn't they? Passed down through the hills like a secret whispered in the winds. But one of the ways thought to get rid of warts was by buying them. It was said that certain folks possessed the ability to purchase a wart from you with just a single coin. And once they bought it, the wart became theirs, and it would vanish. Of course, not everyone had this special knack of buying warts. It seemed to require a touch of magic, some sort of sprinkle of an otherworldly power that only a chosen few possessed. The belief of buying warts can be traced back to the old days in England. Back then, when somebody fell ill, people believed it was a mischief of an old evil spirit. And to confuse these spirits and protect their sick loved ones, folks would resort to peculiar measures. They would sell their sons or daughters to neighbors, hoping that the spirit would grow bewildered and lose track of the afflicted child. But over time, this practice transformed from selling children to selling warts, a curious evolution that spoke volumes about the resilience and the ingenuity of our ancestors. Other Appalachian remedies for warts were as diverse as the wildflowers that adorn the hillsides. Some claimed that washing your hands in water used to boil eggs would work wonders. Others swore by the power of rubbing a wart with a bean pod before secretly burying it. And as a bean pod decayed and mingled with the soil, the wart would gradually vanish, as if it had never even been there. Another method involved a piece of string. For each wart you had, you would tie a knot in the string. Then you would pick at each wart until it bled, placing a tiny drop of blood on each knot from each wart. Finally, you would bury the string and waited for the day it would decompose, taking the warts with it. There was also the curious practice of using a pebble from under the eaves of a house. This stone held mystical properties that could banish warts. All it took was rubbing the pebble around the wart 3 times and passing it back to the person with the wart. They would then find a hiding spot in the eaves strip of the house, where the pebble would be safely concealed. And as if by some Appalachian magic, the wart would fade away, leaving only a faint memory behind. In my own family, there were tales that sparked wonder and awe. A close relative once shared a story of an unsuspected wart cure. He had a wart on his hand, completely unaware of what was about to happen. An older man asked him for a chew of backer from his twist, and without thinking much of it, he obliged and handed over the backer. The man took it from his hand, and in that simple exchange the wart mysteriously vanished. And it wasn't until later, when he was visiting his sister's house, that the subject of the wart come up. She asked him about it, and he casually mentioned it had gone away. And to his surprise, she revealed that she had asked the man to help him with the wart, believing in his hidden powers. And it seemed that through a touch and a silent charm, the man unknowingly worked his Appalachian magic and banished the wart for good. Another family member had sought the aid of a wart charmer. With whispered words and gentle rubs, the charmer set in motion an ancient ritual, and over the course of a week or so, the warts gradually faded away, leaving no trace of their presence. It was a display of belief in the power of intention, reminding us that there is still much we can learn from the wisdom of our Appalachian ancestors. Our ancestors, living amidst these old hollers and hills, they held on to their customs and beliefs, and they passed them down through the generations, and they navigated through life's challenges with a quiet wisdom, finding happiness and solution to the simplest of problems. You know, as I reflect on these stories, I'm reminded of the enduring power of belief and the strength that comes from embracing my roots. You know, these Appalachian Mountains, they whisper tales of the past, and they remind you to cherish the knowledge and traditions that have shaped us. You know, these old ways seem peculiar to some, but to me, they are a cherished part of my heritage, a reminder of the indomitable spirit that resides within these hills. So let us hold on to these stories and pass them on down for future generations, ensuring that the wisdom of our heritage ain't never forgotten. And may their lessons continue to inspire us, their faith continue to guide us, and their wart cures continue to remind us of the beauty that lies with the simplicity of life in the Appalachians.